This is the photograph almost no one remembers. Not the great ship, not the iceberg. A cluster of small wooden boats rowing across a flat dawn sea toward the camera, toward rescue. Everyone knows the ship that sank that night. Almost no one can name the ship that came back for them. This is her story. This is her story. She was called Titanic, the largest moving object ever built by human hands. Here she is on her sea trials in early April 1912, under tow, brand new, unmarked, perfect. In 5 days, she would be at the bottom of the Atlantic, 2.5 miles down. She was built in Belfast, alongside her older sister Olympic, by 15,000 men of the Harland and Wolff shipyard. The world had never seen anything like her, 11 stories tall, nearly 1/4 of a mile long, a floating city of glass and gilt and steel. The papers called her practically unsinkable. Not quite the flat boast that legend remembers, but close enough that some of the richest people on Earth and hundreds of immigrants chasing a new life would trust her with everything they had. Her captain was Edward John Smith, the most senior and most trusted commander in the White Star Fleet. It was to be his last voyage before retirement, a gentle farewell across a calm sea. Hold his face for a moment. He knew these waters as well as any man alive, and still it would not be enough. Around him, his officers, experienced men in pressed uniforms, proud of the ship, sure of the season. The North Atlantic in April was cold, and everyone knew there was ice about. No one thought it could touch a ship like this. Now meet the other ship, the one this film is really about, the Carpathia. A modest Cunard liner, 10 years old, half Titanic size, built to carry immigrants to the Mediterranean. On the night of the 14th of April, she was steaming east, away from New York, most of her passengers already asleep. She was nobody's idea of a rescue ship. She was slow, rated at just 14 knots. She was 58 miles away, on the far side of a sea scattered with icebergs, and in a few hours she was going to do something no one aboard would have believed possible. Her master was Arthur Rostron, a lean, decisive, deeply religious man of 42, known for making up his mind fast and rarely being wrong. That instinct was about to save 700 lives. But first came a stroke of pure luck, one deck below. Carpathia carried a single wireless operator, a young man named Harold Cottam, and by rights he should already have been asleep. He was still at his key, boots half off, when he thought to call Titanic with some routine messages, and heard, instead, the words that would define the rest of his life. High on the Titanic, 40 minutes earlier, a lookout named Frederick Fleet had seen it first, a black mass rising out of a moonless, mirror-flat sea, dead ahead. There were no binoculars in the crow's nest that night. He rang the bell 3 times and telephoned the bridge. There was almost no time left at all. This is it, the iceberg itself, photographed days later from the deck of the Carpathia. A quiet, dirty wall of ancient ice, drifting where no one expected it. 25 seconds of contact, a long, tearing scrape below the waterline, and the unsinkable ship had perhaps 2 hours to live. Cottam ran the distress call up to the bridge. Rostron ordered the ship turned around before the message was even fully confirmed, then thought to ask whether he had done right. He had. Now he had to get there in time. So he did the reckless, magnificent thing. He shut off the heat and the hot water to the entire ship and poured that stolen steam into the engines, driving the little Carpathia to 17.5 knots, far past anything she was built for, straight into the same ice field that had just killed Titanic. And as she ran through the dark, he gave what became famous as the 23 Orders. Every lifeboat swung out and ready, ropes, ladders, and chairs rigged at every doorway. The 3 dining rooms turned into hospitals, a doctor assigned to each. Blankets, hot soup, coffee, brandy, stimulants, every preparation to receive the living and to record the dead made before Carpathia ever reached the scene. He posted extra lookouts at the bow and the wings and the crow's nest, and he stood on his own bridge and conned the ship by eye, dodging icebergs in the dark at a speed that could have torn her open at any moment. For 3.5 hours, he gambled his ship and his own sleeping passengers on getting there. And there was another ship that night, one that did not run. The Californian lay stopped in the very same ice, closer to Titanic than Carpathia ever was. Her officers watched white rockets climb the sky, argued about what they might mean, and woke no one. 2 ships saw the same distress. Only one turned toward it. Historians still argue about the Californian. Rostron's choice needs no argument at all. Carpathia reached the position at 4 in the morning. Titanic had been gone for 1 hour and 40 minutes. There was nothing left on the black water but the boats, and this is one of them, low and crowded with freezing survivors, rowing the last yards to the ship that came. One by one, through a cold and brightening dawn, the boats came alongside. They lifted the survivors up in slings and bosun's chairs and rope ladders, some too numb to climb, some who had just watched a husband or a father step back onto a sinking deck so that they could live. They hauled the emptied lifeboats up onto the Carpathia's deck, one after another. These wooden boats were the only part of Titanic that would ever be saved, the only pieces of her that ever reached New York. By 8:30, the last boat was aboard. About 705 people stood on Carpathia's decks, all that remained of the more than 2,200 who had sailed. Rostron ordered the sea searched again for the living. There were none left. Then he called for a service, for the saved and for the lost. They sat in the passageways and on the open decks of a ship built for half their number. Most were women, widows now, many of them of an hour's standing, wrapped in borrowed blankets, staring at a horizon that had swallowed their whole world before sunrise. Around 1,500 people had died in the freezing water that night, the largest loss of life at sea anyone could remember in peacetime. Nearly every survivor on that deck had lost someone. The silence aboard, more than one of them said, was the worst part. There were surviving crew among them too, stewardesses who had helped load others into the boats before themselves, gathered here on a quay a few days later, alive and hollowed out. And a handful of Titanic's own men, stokers, stewards, seamen, who had come up out of the boiler rooms or off the boats with nothing but the clothes they stood in and their lives. For 4 days, the Carpathia turned her back on her own voyage and carried them home, her passengers giving up their cabins and their clothes to strangers who had lost everything they owned. And on the evening of the 18th of April, in a cold and driving rain, she came up the Hudson behind her tugs, past a city that had been holding its breath for 3 days. Reporters had chased her in tugboats down the harbor, shouting questions across the water. Rostron refused to let a single one aboard until every survivor was safely ashore. His duty, he said, was to them. 30 40,000 people had gathered at the waterfront and in the streets beyond, families praying that a name they loved would be among the 700 clergymen, reporters, the merely curious. New York had never seen a crowd assemble like it or wait so quietly. They stood in the dark under a field of black umbrellas, watching the gangway as the survivors came down one at a time into the arms of the waiting, or into a silence that told a family everything before a word was spoken. Among the last to leave was a young man carried down on the shoulders of the crowd, his feet crushed and frostbitten. Harold Bride, Titanic's junior wireless operator, who had stayed at his key sending calls for help until the sea reached the cabin door. He remembered the band still playing on the tilting deck to the very end. Not the hymn of legend, he insisted. A quiet tune, he said, called Autumn. The next morning, the whole world knew. Rescued by Carpathia, the one thread of good news in the worst disaster the sea had ever handed the modern age. Whatever the true count, one small ship had pulled every living soul out of that ice. The investigations began within days. A United States Senate inquiry and a British one, hundreds of hours of testimony. They asked why there were lifeboats for barely half the people aboard. They asked about the Californian, and nearly every witness on both sides of the ocean said the same thing about the Carpathia. The survivors did not forget. Led by a Denver millionairess, the newspapers christened the unsinkable Molly Brown. They had a silver-loving cup and medals struck for Rostron and his crew, and here she is, placing that cup in his hands. He would keep it for the rest of his life. The United States Congress struck him a gold medal. The King of England made him a knight, but Rostron always deflected the praise, insisting that on that impossible night, driving a slow ship blind through the ice, the credit had never been quite his alone. Captain Smith of the Titanic was never seen after the end. He went down with the ship he had been so sure of, one of some 1,500 who did. We do not show you their faces here. We only say that they were real and that they were here. The Carpathia herself did not have long either. 6 years later, in 1918, a German torpedo sent her to the bottom of the Atlantic too, but by then she had already done the one thing for which she would always be remembered. About 1,500 people were lost that night, and we say their names in sorrow. But 705 went home, because one tired wireless boy was still awake, and one captain turned his ship around and ran toward the disaster instead of away from it. They were here. And they came back. Try not to forget them either. If their story stayed with you, subscribe to Lost and Found Archives and help keep them from being forgotten. New faces from before living memory.